Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to start now. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our CSO representatives. Welcome to the council members and to the secretariat. My name is Anar Mamdani, and I am the alternate council member from Canada, where I work for Global Affairs Canada. As all of you know, this panel, this session is meant to serve as an opportunity for the GEF Council to consult with CSOs and women's groups about concrete opportunities on how they can best support gender-responsive projects and programs, as well as identify recommendations for GEF 7 implementation. From a Canadian perspective, this is a very important issue because the Government of Canada places significant importance on gender equality in the work that we do, both domestically and abroad. As reflected in our Feminist International Assistance Policy, Canada strongly believes that gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls are inextricable from the effort to address global environmental challenges. We are very encouraged by the GEF's new policy on gender equality, as well as the accompanying implementation strategy and guidelines. We see that the GEF is increasingly honing in on concrete entry points for addressing some of the major gaps that we have assessed. But there needs to be much more done collectively, and I am looking forward to hearing from all of you on what we can do. We consider the CSO network as an integral part of the GEF's commitment to gender equality because you have always pushed the fund to steer its focus in this direction, but also because your organizations are doing some of the most important work in addressing gender equality and environmental impact at a grassroots level. I hope that today's session will allow us to tap into some of the knowledge and best practices our various panelists have gathered through experiences in this space. Canada is certainly interested in learning more so that we may better apply the lessons learned by CSOs and Indigenous peoples in a meaningful way to the GEF's policies and processes going forward. We have a very packed agenda for this afternoon, so let me briefly outline what we can expect to hear. We are going to be starting off with a short video presentation, and this will be followed by a brief overview of GEF's approach to gender, which Gabriella will be providing. And then we will have a very interesting Q&A session with our 9 panelists that we have, or rather 10 panelists that we have, which we will try to do our best to hear from all of you and keep on time as well. And then we're going to have a Q&A session between participants and panelists, a short set of closing remarks, and then the launch of a publication on gender. And then this will be followed more broadly by the summary and closing for today's event, the CSO Dialogue. So we're going to start right now with the screening of the video.
Este campo de aquí, que era también basural, todo eso ha sido forestado con árboles de tara.
Ahora casa yo no ujo etu ya ujepa no me ageti haga jepa unene ngeta te queremos más plástica mono no ngero wete kucha o plástico ya mana mo ujo ho kukuta ko evirimwe ay tomona pomar un truco genji sasho nareka pe hatu ji kurunte ka genge pe ja pe hatu randa shiki mestor
ko ang krito me ganin no nyu titi ban ya jam ta udo no nyu yang redo nyu da ko tan udo.
Entonces pienso que con estos árboles se podía, ¿no? A través de que van creciendo, ellos van a poder captar todo el monóxido de carbono y liberar gases, un aire limpio para nosotros, para nuestra población. no solamente económicamente, sino también políticamente, porque hemos podido también conversar con las autoridades para pedirle apoyo por el terreno y también con las mujeres, ¿no? Socialmente, porque nosotros apoyamos a las mujeres, salimos también a defender nuestros derechos. Entonces, realmente estas iniciativas se deben seguir apoyando.
I forgot to mention that was a video that was produced by the GEF Secretariat in collaboration with UNDP, the Small Grants Program, and the CSO Network. So right now we're going to have a short overview.
In a moment, I'm going to step into my office here at my home and pull out my computer and show you exactly how it is that I went.
Okay. Right now, we're going to have a brief overview of Jeff's approach to gender, and that's going to be done by Gabriella Richardson-Tem, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She has been leading work in the GEF Secretariat on gender and social issues for the past 3 years, and was instrumental in developing the new policy, guidelines, and implementation strategies. So, Gabriella, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to join you here today. My name is Gabriella Richardson-Tem. I work here at the GEF Secretariat. I do not really want to spend too much time speaking to you. I really want to leave most of the time for you to engage with this great panelist that we have in front of us. But just to get us started, I thought for some of you that might not be aware or that does not know the background on Jeff's work on gender, I thought it needs to take about 5 minutes to give you a quick overview of where we were and where we are and where we're hoping to head in the future when it comes to mainstreaming and addressing gender and empowering women. So that's what I'm going to try to do for 5 minutes. And if I speak too long, I hope my chair will interrupt me. So just to take it back a little bit, Jeff has actually been addressing gender for a fairly long period of time. We started already in 2012 when our council approved a policy on gender mainstreaming. This policy was developed really as part of the accreditation process when we were opening up for additional agencies for the GEF. This policy was very much sort of linked to, I would argue, more of a do no harm approach. It was really a little bit set in a safeguard mode of let's not do any harm, and by doing analysis and other things, but maybe not so much in terms of the proactive doing good. But following this policy, the GEF Secretariat developed something that we call the GEF Gender Action Plan. It was an action plan that reached for the whole period of the GEF 6 replenishment period. It started in 2014 and actually just ended last year. This plan set out very clear action areas for us to move forward, and the major focuses in it was really analysis and learning, collaboration, engaging with our agencies and other partners to really improve our understanding what we needed to do better. It was also looking more in terms of monitoring our portfolio, understanding what the kind of results we were generating, and as again, knowledge management products. And we did see over this period of time quite a lot of improvements in terms of how our agencies were designing projects. And one of the great outputs of this period was the establishment of the GEF Gender Partnership, which is very unique in its format. It includes representatives of gender focal points from each of our 18 agencies, gender focal point from the MEA secretariats, from all of the MEAs that we serve. It also includes representatives from the GEF Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, and other partners we have engaged, for example, UN Women and other expert organizations. One of also the good features with this was that we have also improved our collaboration with other financial mechanisms like the GCF, CIF, and the Adaptation Fund to really harness the knowledge and the experiences addressing gender in the environmental sector. So moving forward, I mean, one of the things that was highlighted during the implementation of the action plan and also by our independent evaluation office was that we might not have done as good as we thought that we were doing. We were still missing that a lot of our projects did not actually do gender analysis prior to starting implementation. We also saw that there was some weaknesses in terms of the results of following through during the implementation. Perhaps mostly, I think it was that we probably did not have the ambition of really doing good. And what the new policy really sets out is both this greater ambition of let's move from just do no harm to really actually contribute to gender equality and women's empowerment as a means for global environmental benefits or generating global environmental benefits. So the policy really sets that tone. So I say moving from do no harm to do good approach. In order to do that, one of the also features of the policy is really the clarifications of the standards and standards requirement in the GEF project cycle, and what is it that we are requiring across the project cycle. And I will go into that a little bit more in detail in my next slide. And I don't want to talk too much, but just again to highlight, it's very important to have clear expectations and standards in terms of when you develop or design a project, when you implement the project, and also what you are reporting as part of your monitoring evaluation. So the policy sets out very clear standards in this regard, and I'm not going to go into them in detail, just to highlight three things. One is the requirement of a gender analysis prior to CEO endorsement, so prior to you receiving money, to an agency receiving money for implementation. That's one. Two is the elaboration of the specific activities geared to addressing gender equality or women's empowerment, that these are also outlined in the project documents. And third is the issue on terms of requiring sex-desegregated indicators and gender indicators, so that it is not just talk, that we actually are following through and seeing what we are, what kind of results our projects has. And I think what is really important, and I'm going to end actually with this, it's not just to do gender for gender's sake. It's not just to address it in that matter. It's really focusing on those areas and those gender gaps that really are relevant for the GEF. And in our new gender implementation strategy that the Council approved last in Da Nang in June, we identified three gender gaps that we think are critical for the GEF as a partnership to address in order to be more effective as an environmental organization. And those are related to, one, women's equal access and control over natural resources. This is one of the areas that we see as a major gap, and also an area that we've seen that actually the GEF has a great opportunity to contribute towards closing. Third, it's really the focus, and I'm certain that we'll hear a lot about that in the panel today, is improving women's participation and leadership in environmental action, both in terms of projects, but also in terms of policy and other fora, and I'm certain we're going to hear much more about that. And thirdly, is to making sure that men and women benefit equally from the socioeconomic services that actually our environmental programs produces. So those are the three areas that we are focusing on. But one of the things that we do recognize, this is not easy. So we understand that we are going to continue working on this with all our agencies, but also partners in the civil society and others. And just to give you a little bit of additional background, we have just now, we did release actually 6 months ago, but finally today we have a paper format, and thank you, we have a new guidance to advance gender equality. And this one sort of provides details and steps and guiding questions on how to address gender in GEF programs and projects. We are also very, very pleased with the collaboration that we've had with the Small Grants Program and the broad GEF gender partnership across the board, and we developed something that we call an open online course on gender and the environment. This course has been done in very close collaboration with each of the MEAs that we serve. The Convention on Climate, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on Land Degradation, and also the Chemicals Conventions. And this, you can access this is an online self-paced course. It includes modules on each of these areas. So it has 6 modules altogether, and these, and I think there is materials for almost like 5 hours in this course, and you will receive a certificate afterwards, so you can get to it there. So I'm going to end now because I think I shouldn't. It's not for my space to talk, so I'm going to move directly over to our panelists, and I'm going to close. Can I close this? Maybe not. Can you turn off the? There, thank you. Should I? We'll move forward. So what we are planning today, and as we highlighted in the beginning, this session is about creating an opportunity for Council to engage with civil society on issues related to gender. What we have here today, and now I'm going to move. Swift, can people hear me from this as well? So what we have done is that we have been trying to, we asked all of the participating CSOs here today if anyone wanted to be on a panel. And as you can see, there was many that wanted to join us here. There is a lot of work going around on gender. And what we are so happy here is that we have representatives here from both Indigenous peoples, youth organizations, and women groups. And so it's a fabulous panel you have in front of us. I just want to say before we get started, we have a couple of questions that we have discussed before that, to share both some of the challenges that the different organizations have, some best practices, and some recommendations. We will have a little bit of conversation here in about 1 hour or so, but then what we'd like to do is to really engage any council members to ask any questions. We also would like to engage the other CSOs that are sitting around the table if they want to add or contribute to the conversation. So that's how we're going to do it. So again, the conversation, we're focusing on 3 parts. We're going to have one part that talks about why is it important to address either Indigenous peoples, youth, or gender issues in environmental action, both in environmental policies, but also in the development of projects and programs. Why is it important? So that's one area. We also want to highlight that a lot of good things are happening on the ground. So we're also going to have one section where where the panelists are going to share some of the best practices of what they think works. The third part that we're going to have to discuss is a little bit, what are some of the challenges? There are still a lot of remaining challenges, and what are some of the recommendations from this group moving forward. Now I will need my script because we have so many. So I do need my script. So we're going to start talking about why it matters. And actually, I do need to have the screen on. Could you put the screen back on? Thank you. Yes, sorry, I needed you to have all of the names of the panelists in front of you. This is our great panelists, and if you want to refer to them, you have them on the screen there. So we're going to start asking Edna Kaptoyo, who is I'm going to walk around, so it might be actually, maybe I shouldn't, because maybe I'll make it all a little bit weird, so maybe I will not walk around, I will stand here instead. So, Edna, you have a very long history, both as a human rights activist, as a women's activist. You're a Small Grants Fellow. You have focused both a lot on capacity building at the global and at the national level, specifically linked to climate. And I really want to ask you, why do you think it matters to address gender in climate change activities and action?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Gabriela, for the question, and thank you to all who are here in this session. I think climate change is one of the pressing challenges we are facing today. And why do we need the gendered approach? So in 2011 until 2012, as non-state actors in Kenya, we were working a lot on climate change work, both at the national level and local level. And then we realized there's a lot of gap in terms of how climate actions are being undertaken within the national level or local level. So we decided to form a gender and climate change working group, a Kenyan chapter, and also we got on board state actors as well to join us. And why am I saying that? Then we came up with the slogan, same sky, different impacts. So we have the same sky, the same climate change hazards on us, but then it's impacting different actors differently. And at that time, a lot of media, when there was flooding, we had different kind of messaging. You'd see a woman complaining here, you'll see an elderly man complaining here. And so we wanted to get the message out there that we needed different responses, because when we have the impacts of climate change, depending on how your dependencies, depending on your dependence on natural resources for your livelihood, or issues of maybe capacity or ability to cope or respond to climate change, you needed to have different approaches, and also your priorities as well are different, and also the kind of support that you need for resourcing is different. And that needed to be taken on board. So that informed the work on gender and climate change that I'm doing, and also focusing especially on Indigenous women's rights and so forth. And I think one important thing why we need to really take a gendered approach when we want to focus on climate change is the fact that we need to look at the different segments of society, the men and women, who are really participating in climate change action, who needs support really to access that decision-making space to make their voice visible, who isn't accessing resources, for instance, when they're supposed to do the gender analysis, and then looking at also what are the roles and responsibility of people within the society. What role are youth playing, for instance? What role are women playing? And looking at how can we enhance that and support. And a gendered approach would support that. Also, we live in a landscape, and different groups also are able to interact differently. So within that interaction, you develop specific knowledge that is crucial in terms of how people adapt. For instance, women, I've been working with them the past years within my work as a fellow, and you find that women have specific knowledge, even in the livestock sector as pastoralists, where you assume women do not know about issues of livestock rearing, and they would know when drought is coming. If a particular species of plant is available, then the camels would survive, and they don't need to move to the mountains, and those that move to the mountains during a particular period would survive. And what is needed to be done in terms of the kind of diversification in the livestock that needs to be there. So we need as well to bank on such kind of knowledge in this when we're making decisions in terms of climate action. As well, we have a lot of groups at the community level that are doing initiatives to respond to climate change. So we need to tap into those initiatives that are already being done by the different groups, and also to support to scale it up, because we are working in local level solution, but we need global level action as well. And this can inform as well that. And also, different groups also have an understanding, both men and women have different understanding in terms of the socioeconomic dynamics within the community and families. And this is important when climate change action planning is being done. And when you're mapping that within the gender, within your gender analysis, it's easy to see how well you need to respond. And also the fact that if you miss out to involve the different segments, let's say women or men are not being engaged better at different spaces, then we are in the SDG era. We need to bring everyone on board, leave no one behind to ensure development. So really, we need to close the gap in terms of inequality, and the climate change action, like environmental action, presents that entry point really to address these gaps, and also to scale up in terms of also moving beyond environment sectors alone. Because looking at a gendered approach, if a woman is, for instance, engaging in addressing environment issue, like for water as well, it's also impacting on the health sector, because they're going to have clean water if they're working on catchment protection and so forth. So it goes beyond the sector. And also, I think it presents an opportunity to know where do we need to build capacity, because if you build capacity of youth and women, for instance, in renewable energy, and in the work in terms of taking a gendered approach, you're able to support entrepreneurship and spread out the thing. And I think it's an era as closing that we need to overachieve. If we underachieve, then we are missing out, because time to act is now. So a gendered approach provides that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you so much. And you will have more chance to maybe talk a little bit more, elaborate further on that. But I think we should just move forward a little bit in the conversation. We're still discussing, so why is it important to address issues of gender in environmental action? So I wanted to move to you, Andora Poran. You founded an association in Mauritius that deals first with supporting education for children, and then on top of that you set up another organization, and Secret Grand-Mère, yes, which is really supporting women entrepreneurs. You're also, I know that you've had several awards and other board member activities, so you really worked in this field, especially on women entrepreneurship, for a very long time. And I want to ask you specifically, why do you think it really is important to push for women's entrepreneurial skills in the context of the environment?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the experience from Mauritius. Well, we started the project, our NGO, firstly we started to work for the education of children, but seeing that the mothers are just relying on us to assist them, then we started to see what we can do for women so that they can get a job. And this is why, taking into consideration environmental issue, so we started to work on a project with medicinal plants. So our project consisted of cultivating 35 varieties of medicinal plants, which were nearly to extinct in Mauritius, among which we have 13 endemic medicinal plants. So we started making awareness about this. And why we choose women? Because we know that women are the mother of the family. And if we start working with the women, they will be able to help the children. And also it is easier for us to get the trust of women to work on such a project. So we started this project working on 35 varieties of medicinal plants, giving them the knowledge about the cultivation and how to cater for the plants, how to care for it. And also they get the training from the environmental ministries in Mauritius. Then we started doing the cultivation, and our mission was to sensitize the public at large about the cultivation and propagation of medicinal plants. So this has been very successful. We have been able, we can say that we are the first one in Mauritius to have started working on medicinal plants, which exist since long. We have over 1,500 varieties of medicinal plants in Mauritius, and nobody thought about trying to work on these plants. And when we started this project, we got the support, of course, from the GEF SGP, which funded the first project, the first phase of the project, which was setting up of a greenhouse to cultivate the medicinal plants. Then we were provided with dehydrating machines in order to dehydrate and process the plants. Because at first, we were just thinking about growing medicinal plants and sensitizing people to grow it. But when we had a lot of plants and we did not know what to do with the plants, then we started converting them into herbal teas, which maybe some of you will get the opportunity to have one at least to bring home. So when we started working with this, then the ministry found that it is very important to work with whatever we have in Mauritius. Then we started sensitizing people to grow it in their yard and also on slopes, because in Mauritius we have many people that their houses are situated on land and slopes. So we started helping in land degradation by growing the medicinal plants on the slopes. And today I can say that everywhere in Mauritius you will see people talking about medicinal plants, the ministry, and they will always invite us to come and give them the training and do talks on medicinal plants. So I can say that we have been growing over 50,000 plants in different parts of Mauritius, medicinal plants. And also what is important is because we work with women, and these women are still with us up to now, working on the greenhouse, working in the factory where we are transforming these plants into herbal teas. And what I would say, your question was why it matters. Why it matters to work with women. Well, I would say that, a woman, when she starts to do a project or work on something, is just as a baby that she has given birth to. She will care for it, she will cater for it, and will do everything in order to succeed in that field. And I think this is the success of our story, because we have been having more women on it. But this have not stopped us from having men, because our project was to work only with women. At first, we targeted 20 women, but when the husbands see the success of the medicinal plants, they started coming and give us a hand in it. And now I can say even I was invited last year to an island called Rodrigues, which is near Mauritius. And over there, I was supposed to train 30 women in the cultivation of medicinal plants, because over there also there is a lot. But when I went there were 90 people waiting for me, among which we had 82 women and 8 men, and all of them today are just transforming medicinal plants. They have a lot of endemic plants that they are growing. So women is a key success of any project. I can say that they will take care of a project, and they will know how to deal with whenever there is a problem. And
you will have a chance to go in a little bit more in detail in the next question round. Okay. So thank you so much, Nora. I wanted to actually, now we've heard a little different perspectives, and now I think it's about time that we move to our youth representative. I think it's the only one we have here, Chibisi. So you are working in a youth organization in Ghana that very much focuses on getting youth engaged in environmental policy, and also get youth engaged in project development and things like that. Is that correct? Yeah? So why do you think it's so important to have youth engaged on environmental policy issues?
Well, thank you very much, Gabriela, for this opportunity, and good afternoon to everyone. To answer the why, I would like to just focus on 3 main reasons.
Yes.
The first reason is that it's often said that the youth are the future leaders. Uh-huh. So if the youth are the future leaders, that means that whatever happens today will have consequences on them in future. So it is important to start engaging them now, so they can become part of the process in resolving the environmental issues that we have. Secondly, we've also observed that anytime there are meetings and programs, both at the international level, regional level, be the UN General Assembly, and they come out with their affirmations or declarations, they keep making a statement that when it comes to the decision-making process, young people must be involved. So we've realized that even at the international level or global level, there's that conscious effort to involve young people in the decision-making process. So that alone shows that then there's a need to engage youth in environmental actions. The third point I also want to make is the fact that without any shadow of doubt, young people have the skills, they have the energies, they have the abilities. So how then do we harness all these resources to pursue good environmental governance? To give an example, it's like water flowing. If you don't control what the water leads to, it cannot become a disaster or can be a good purpose. So we believe that with that kind of force, then we need to channel those forces very well so that young people can become change agents so as to reduce social vices. So to give some simple example, having read all these international agreements and all that, we chose to test the case because in our country, government finds it very difficult to bring youth to the table because they said young people are full of, social vices. They create chaos. They bring confusion. Why should we bring them on board? So we decided to do our own effort by demonstrating that young people also have what it takes to contribute to the process. So we did some policy analysis on our climate change interventions in Ghana. When Ghana wrote its report to the UNFCCC, the second annual report, we contributed to the process. The MBSAP in Ghana were part of the process. So that has opened a door for the government to know that, okay, youth at least have something to demonstrate. And to give a final example, for about 2 years, the youth group in Ghana actually challenged the government of Ghana to halt the construction of coal power plant. Because we told them that, look, you cannot sign the Paris Agreement and come home to build coal plants. Well, some countries can build a coal plant, but as far as we are concerned, we are going to hold you accountable. So for that reason, for 2 years, we engaged government to use our own social media platforms, and government halted coal plant establishment. And we are saying that instead of coal plants, let's look at renewable energies. So at least we have shown that youth have the energy and the talent to also contribute to environmental actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you'll have a chance later in the end to also see some of your recommendations, what could be done more to engage youth. But now let's move forward. Caroline, you are you're leading a women's organization in the Niger Delta that is really promoting both human rights issues and also issues of gender. I think this organization, you deal a lot with empowerment and with conflict resolutions, peacemaking, or peace building it's called, and as well as environmental and climate change issues. So in this context, why is it that you think it's so important to engage women and to really put that at the forefront of your activities in the Delta?
Thank you so much. Let me say that the Niger Delta is the largest wetland in Africa, and it has the highest challenge of environmental issues in the whole world. We are faced with the greatest environmental injustices in the world. That is the place where you see that gas that is being fled has over 2,000 sites in a day. It's a place where if you put this dress and you just walk to the market and come back, you can't put it on tomorrow because the whole environment is polluted. And then this has posed a health risk on the lives of women. I tell you that in the Niger Delta, life expectancy is now between 45 years of age. You see young women dying of cancer-related diseases. And I think that we have issues of livelihood also, and this have to link with the issue of women in leadership position, because where the decisions are being made on environmental issues, the women, they are not on the table. The men just go there and then they make these decisions and then they come back and then they announce to the women, this is what the government have said. But you see, when women are included in decision-making processes of environmental issues, you will see that there will be progress made to bridge the gaps on environmental challenges. Then there is a big gap on access to land and control of resources, especially for agriculture. You see, the women who are mostly the farmers rent lands from the men. They don't even have access to lands. And we have this issue of gender, that a woman is not supposed to speak in the society. a woman does not have the right to own a land. But thank God that for gender equality issues that are coming up and organizations like ours that are building capacities of women, start telling them on how to stand up for your rights and claim your space at the table, they are beginning to stand with their families to say, if the land belongs to all of us and our father gave birth to 5 of us, I should have equal access to this land so that me too can cultivate my farmlands, then my children will have something to live on. So the issues of women's rights is something that we have used to make women to form part of critical decision-making processes in environmental issues in the Niger Delta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you. It was very powerful what you were describing in the Niger Delta. I wanted to move to another continent and to you, Ana Francisca, and I think for all of you, I think she's going to speak in Spanish, so if for you that do not understand, you could put your headphones on. You are a Maya Pokomnam. I can never so you have to describe yourself as well. I know that you've been very active in the Indigenous Peoples Network in Guatemala. You're also a legal gender advisor to the Indigenous authorities. Could you, based on all of your experience in Guatemala and working in the network, why you think it is so important to really address Indigenous women's rights and issues, really, and maybe also discuss a little bit what are, the same thing as Caroline did, what are some of the major challenges and gaps that you are facing today?
Well, first of all, with the permission of my grandparents and grandmothers and grandfathers, I owe it to them to be here. I will address you, and allow me at the beginning to say that in dealing with the current situation faced by women, we ought to start off on the basis of 2 contexts. One as women in general, and the other one as Indigenous women. Why as Indigenous women? Well, because we share our own cosmovision, our own identity, our own spirituality. And I am then talking about the following, having placed this context at these experiences and these challenges that we have faced as Indigenous women at a global level. But I will specifically talk about the experiences that we've had in Guatemala. And it is, in fact, that economic empowerment is a determinant factor as women, Indigenous women, to do our thing. Why? Because in Guatemala we have successful experiences as women, as networks of women that are projecting themselves in order to promote and protect all these colors that you see in my huipiles, in my blouses, in this piece of cloth, the multicolor cloth that I have. All of that wealth of knowledge comes from women. So women throughout economic empowerment can stand out. In the weaving of their activity, it is not only colors, because they safeguard colors and the natural colors of the environment, sustainability, not using chemicals such as paintings in the huipiles, such as the one that I'm wearing. Likewise, it is connected. We have economic empowerment linked to participation and decision-making in spaces of boards or councils. And this issue is also linked to a life free of violence, because that has to do, economic empowerment of women has a lot to do with having a violence-free life. And to this, we add another factor that is quite challenging, which is the protection of their knowledge. And this is a huge challenge faced by Indigenous women. They are standing out at a global level when protecting that knowledge. But all of this has an essential pillar, which is language. And I will stop here because language is extremely important at a global level in the conservation of natural resources, in the protection of Mother Nature. Why? because we are women, the transmitters. We say, okay, it is mothers and protectors, etc. No, but we transmit things because it is through language that we transfer that message, that practice from one generation to the next. And so the language, the maternal language, our mother tongue is essential. And also spiritual guides as women. That is a relevant factor because we have to stand for our rights in promoting participation in decision-making. Indigenous women have a close relationship with biodiversity because of that rational practice that we have with water, with Mother Earth, with biodiversity, the sustainability that we give it, the love that we show when talking to Mother Nature. And I don't want to leave this behind because transfer from one generation to the next is important. This young man from Ghana spoke about the importance of youth. Women play an important role, not only with language, not only with transmitting things, but an important challenge that we must all face is a generational transfer. With this, I mean, try to find a way so that our young people will be the ones that will be occupying those spaces for transmission of knowledge. Young women, all of us are the result of that leadership. We come from a local level. So it is important that we take this and that we find a space so that we can truly find ourselves in silence and to see what Mother Nature is telling us through the spiritual link. And that is why I also have a recommendation before I conclude. And when we start in each session, since this is a dialogue and consensus, that we dedicate 1 minute of our time in order to connect ourselves with our forefathers, because it is thanks to them that we're here. Thanks to all these people, defenders of things that are no longer with us. And we are part of that legacy. So I conclude with this. Women, as you know, the main objective of the CBDs talks about fair and equitable participation of benefits and sharing of benefits, and that has to belong to women. That participation, that empowerment is a challenge. And it seems to me that this is a good space in order to bring different cosmovisions that we can share. And thank you very much for the space, for the opportunity, and for the knowledge and the opportunity that you gave us to discuss this with you. Thank you very much. In my language, Tioshti.
Thank you so much, Ana Francisca. Hopefully you will have a chance again in the end when we have an open conversation to reiterate some of your recommendations as well. So I think we have one more question in this section, and I wanted to direct it to someone that is not part of the CSOs, but is, however, representing an international NGO, a global international NGO, and that's Kame Westerman. She has been leading Conservation International's work on gender for many years. And you have most probably witnessed how these bigger environmental organizations are changing the way that they are addressing gender. And I want to just quickly, if you can reflect, why do you think it is that they are changing? Is it just because it sounds good, or is it because there potentially is a reason for it?
Thanks, Gabriela. I'll be very brief and just sort of echo everything that we've heard already so far from these wonderful panelists. From the conservation perspective, at Conservation International and just more broadly, our mission is really about protecting nature for the well-being of people. And there's a lot of research now coming out. We've just heard a lot of case studies and firsthand examples of how conservation and climate change is part of that too. It's more effective, it's more efficient, and it's more equitable when we take a gender lens, a gendered approach. We want to make sure that the efforts that we do as an international organization working with all of our partners is as sustainable as possible, and really making sure that all of the stakeholders, at all different levels and then within communities, men and women, youth, boys and girls, people from different populations are really involved, and that's how we make it most sustainable.
Thank you so much, Kim. And I think this is a very good, different perspective from the others, because we also, as an NGO, you play a different role as well. So thank you for that. So I'm looking at time. We are doing okay. We are a little bit off. My chair is looking at me. So let's move forward to the next section that we wanted to focus on some of the good practices. What is really working out there? What are some good approaches that works in your context? Really thinking about what are some of those approaches that I don't want to use the word to scale up, but something that we can learn from each other that works. And I'm going to move to Tracy. You are also from Nigeria. You're working for a women's organization in Nigeria, Women in the Environmental Program, also set up to deal with a lot of the industrial pollution issues. So you're engaged also both globally, I hear, but also, of course, in Nigeria itself on issues on pollution. And I wanted to ask you, now we move a little bit away from the why, what really focus on what are some of the things that you think is working in terms of improving women's participation in the issues that you're dealing with, or anything else?
Okay, thank you very much. 21 years ago, my executive director, Priscilla Chakwa, found out that there was industrial pollution in Kaduna State, and they were polluting the river. And women would go there because the water was soapy. They thought it was an opportunity to have free bathing soap. So they would go there and use the water to wash and bathe. And, they broke out in all kinds of sickness, and that's where we started from. So most of our approaches, the issue about gender being that it's new and people don't really understand it coming from a patriarchal society, we try to address it at various levels. So one of the ways that we do that is at policy level. You don't want to blame the people because they are not aware. They are being used to doing policies the way they know, generalizing it without knowing how it really affects the different gender that, operate in the society. So what we do is we try to create awareness and also do gender analysis of some of those environmental policies to tell them that, okay, this is what is going on and this is how the policy should be. Because if you don't have a policy that is holistic enough to address the issues of gender, then when you are implementing, you'll be blind in what you're doing. You'll just be doing a blind approach and, we'll still have the problems that we are having today. And so one of our approaches is to do that, to create awareness also at that level. We also engage a lot in international events and all that to promote it. We also work at grassroots level. We engage because in our country, we are traditional. We have villages and all that. There are people who are responsible, what we call the gatekeepers. They are responsible for keeping the communities. These are the religious leaders. These are the political leaders and people who take care of those communities. So before you go into doing a project in such communities, you have to involve them. And by involving them, you are breaking serious ground because they are the ones who allow their women to participate in whatever activity that you are doing. If they say no, the whole community rejects you. So what we do is to approach them and identify them and talk with them and tell them what we want to do. And they open up their communities and we involve everybody. We involve the youth, we involve the men, we involve the women. In some cases, you have to involve the women separately and involve the men separately. It depends on the community structure and how they operate. You need to address it like that. We also do a lot of media activities. We do documentaries. We grant interviews. So we work a lot with media houses in Nigeria to create awareness. So those multiple approaches in addressing gender gaps in environment has worked for us. For instance, in the case of POPs, we had to do a research about what's going on, and then we use that video a lot to create awareness. So those are the approaches that really have worked for us in Nigeria.
Thanks so much, Tracy, for sharing those good practices with all of us. We're going to move forward. Where are you? Tommy Garnett, I'm going to move to you. You have also a long history. I think everyone has a long history working in the environmental field, and I know you both globally and nationally in Sierra Leone. You founded an organization called the Environmental Foundation for Africa, right, which was really founded after the civil war or coup d'etat, yes, in the start, to really deal with the issues on environmental impacts after the conflict. So I wanted to ask you, what do you, in that context, what is something that has worked, what is a good practice in your work, both in your foundation, but also maybe more in that field, that things that has worked in terms of addressing gender or empowering women, and how it actually has helped you to accomplish your goal in your foundation?
Yeah, it's a loaded one in 2 minutes.
Yes.
You need a bit of a history lesson. No, but I'll keep it short. EFA was established in 1992, the year of the Rio Summit, Agenda 21, acting globally, acting locally and thinking globally. We were young, aspirational Africans concerned about the role Africa was playing in advancing environmental agenda. And unfortunately, my war started in my country at the time, and because of the nature of the war, it was about resources, it was about diamonds, it was about other things related to the environment, and in the process, the environment was being massacred, so to speak. So when people were being killed, suddenly the environment didn't matter so much anymore, and it was all about how to stop the suffering of people, which was right, but something had to happen about the environment. So that's kind of like the backdrop against which my organization came on the scene. And you can imagine that in a situation of complete lawlessness, it's a complete breakdown in law and order. In fact, in 1997, there was a coup d'etat that saw the government of Sierra Leone out into exile in Guinea, and you had rebels take over the country. You had refugee camps, you had displaced camps, you had kind of a chaotic situation prevailing in both Liberia and Sierra Leone, affecting the neighboring countries. So everybody thought we were crazy trying to do environmental work at this time. And of course, the only message we could give was, in fact, it's at this time that we should be talking about the fact that in some ways we have all contributed to the problem. Everyone is benefiting somehow from what is coming out of these extractive industries. Some of us, our fees were paid by parents working in mining companies. So it's not about this is wrong, this is wrong. It was what can we all do together? So we didn't set out to emphasize the role of different genders. It was about people. EFA envisions a people empowered to protect the integrity of nature. And at this time, the integrity of nature was being slaughtered. So we had to figure out a way to communicate effectively to all the groups, children, men, women, communities, politicians, everybody who could listen. Now, in more specific terms, we had to do a lot of work in refugee camps, in displaced camps, and what happens at this time is that because there's so much lawlessness, there's a lot of belligerent youth who are in power because they have guns and they're in control. And you really have to be careful how you engage. Most people would not allow you to speak to their wives, for example. So when you organize a workshop where you're talking about bringing people together to plant trees, the only way you could communicate was, well, look, guys, you're in a refugee camp. By 10 o'clock, the sun is out. There is no shelter for you. So get involved with planting a tree. In a year's time, you don't know how long this war is going to take. In a year's time, there will be a shade in front of your shelter that can at least protect you and your family. And maybe at some point, this will also serve as firewood for you. And anyway, if you leave tomorrow, you can say thank you to this land for hosting you in your time of need. These were the kind of messages that actually enabled us to reach out to the various groups. For the kids, it was mostly about communicating the fact that what we're doing today is for your tomorrow. Today you are refugees, but what happens when you go back home? What knowledge are you going back with? The toilets that are being built for refugees are from sticks and fronds coming from the bushes. Everything that was happening there was adding to the environmental problem. So it was not very difficult to find reasons to communicate why everybody had to be involved. It was just about being consistent in communicating that message and getting all the policymakers and donors especially to back this, and they did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Let's move forward. Caroline, I know you already actually did describe quite a lot of good practices, so therefore I'll give you a very short period to just identify one of the things that you think has really worked well in your work.
Okay. One thing that worked for us were the gender and climate justice tribunals that were organized by us. We used it to strengthen the voices of the women for them to be able to search for better solutions on environmental impact in their lives. And then also we empower them with tools with which they can fight for inclusion in decision-making processes and then stand up for their rights. So what we do is that we raise awareness on the voluntary principles of business and human rights on the environment. We also try to create awareness on the UN human rights instruments and then the African Charter on Peoples and Human Rights, so that they will have these instruments as a backup just in case anyone still wants to fight, take the space away from them. They will now refer back to it and say, look, the UN declaration says this, that. And with this, we are taking our space. And a lot of grassroots women, they now have idea that there is something that is called human rights. There are instruments that back them up. Even at local level, they use it to engage, and they are taking their spaces and at the local level.
Thank you, Caroline. Anadora, you also did actually describe quite a lot of good practices. So also you have a little time just to highlight what do you think that worked very well in your effort to really engage women as entrepreneurs. And
I can say that before, the women we are working with did not have any knowledge about environmental issues, the problem of climate change, what is affecting all these SDGs, anything. So with workshops that we have been doing and our continuous effort to empower women has made us get a lot of success concerning women in the role of mothers, even in the society, and even to come together with us in order to explain to others what they should do. When we were addressing the issue of climate change with our solar panel, which we added in our project of herbal tea, this has already made a boost, because at the time in 2002, when we started our solar panel, there was nobody doing it in Mauritius. We even had to import the solar panels. And after this, the women, they have been taking all schools to our center to visit it. And from this, we have been able to mobilize so many people for the use of solar panel. And these women have been empowered because now they can talk to the media, to the TV, and explain the importance of the SDGs and how to address them.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, we were going to go into the third section, really talking about recommendations, but then I'm thinking that maybe we could just open it up before we move there, if there's any questions at this time, just to open it up for anyone else that is sitting here and hopefully keeping awake. If there is any questions, otherwise we'll move forward with the next section. And to remember, we will have a lot of time. We will have at least an hour for all of you to interact before we finalize. But I was thinking that maybe there are some questions right now, and we don't want to close this in any way. So if there's any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we move forward. Yes, Marita.
Thank you, Gabriella. And my name is Marita also. I represent Sweden at the GEF Council. I am very touched by the the stories that you are telling us. I missed the first part, so I am sorry about that. I was just wondering if anybody could also talk a little bit about what one should not do. I mean, what is really what has not worked at all, and what one should really watch out for in the future. And also, I wanted to ask you also if did you talk about this already?
Yes, I did talk about this already in my presentation, that we have the new guidance. But if you have anything to say about it,
yes, I looked through this, and because we insisted very much during the GEF 7 replenishment, the recent replenishment of resources of the GEF, that one should develop something more practical to promote gender equality in the project cycle. And I think this is very interesting. This looks into how you can strengthen gender equality in every part of every phase of the project cycle. And I think, Gabriella and your team, you've done a fantastic job on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. So why don't we try to see if anyone can answer Marita's question of what has not worked at all? That was your question, huh? Something that really doesn't work when it comes to addressing gender in the environment sector. Anyone? This is not, yeah? Yeah? You want to say something? Yeah. Oh, wait, you can have that.
Thank you very much. One of the challenges that we have had, especially in the area of deforestation and getting women to use clean cook stoves, have not really worked very well, because sometimes they tell you that the taste of food with firewood is sweeter than using the clean cook stoves that you are bringing. So that, in some cases, has not really worked. Also, the technology to make it cheaper has also posed a challenge in trying to get them to change from those practices. So that has been a major problem, because of the traditional way of tasting, smoking food, and, the cost.
Bueno, no sé si... I don't know if you need to put on a headset. Testing, testing. This is the English booth. Okay. Something that didn't work in Guatemala, something that we saw. Regarding project financing, but is seen from the standpoint of a lack of political will on the part of governments, because even though there are international instruments that say that, for example, the Beijing Platform 1995, where it talks about empowerment and political participation of women in environmental public policy, that continues to be a challenge. But I think that the free, prior, and informed consent, that is something that is not applied to Indigenous communities, especially to Indigenous women. So that continues to be a challenge. We try. We're fighting for it. We are here as Indigenous women and also as women in general, non-Indigenous women, but this is a major challenge and something that we face almost daily. There's a lack of political will on the part of states. For them, programming, financing, things having to do with women is always a problem. And from what I see in my own experience, the funding is minimal, or is sort of okay because it's cross-cutting, but that's all. So there's still much that needs to be done, and we, all of us, continue to struggle in that direction.
Yes, Viviana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this question. It's really very important.
Viviana, I never had a chance to introduce you, so maybe you want to say something, who you are first.
Okay. I'm representing Indigenous Women Network on Biodiversity. And we work for the empowerment of Indigenous women to participate in the decision-making process at different levels. One of the problems that we are always facing is with the with the understanding of the views of gender on indigenous peoples, particularly which is the role of indigenous women. We have like an holistic view where we complement each other, but sometimes when some like movements, women movements, come to indigenous communities and they want to convince that not what we were doing for the long time is not right. And it causes huge problems. For this, I think we really need to see and understand or have a dialogue with like taking into account the cultural diversities, the different views, and why we have some views regarding the role of the women, elders, or children or youth, why we have these rules. And this is very important because many of these good intentions cause huge problems in the communities. And it is something that we don't want to have it. We really want to have a dialogue and work together and to try to find common understanding. No? We don't want like this paternalist view saying you are not right, your views or your form of life is wrong. No, this is for me. It's like thank you so much for this question because I think we need to have more this kind of dialogue that there is not one view about the gender. Thank you.
Okay. Hi there. Just to take a little bit of a different angle to that question, again, very good one. So from an agency perspective and from a large conservation organization perspective, what I see a lot, I work very closely with conservation practitioners. I am one as well. And they tend to take kind of two different tracks. Either one is people say, well, I'm not a gender expert. I can't possibly know what to do around gender. I'm just going to keep my hands off of it. We'll just kind of forget about gender in this project. The other tract I see people taking is, well, anyone can do gender, so we'll just, give that job to the youngest woman in the office, right? And so it's trying to find some middle ground there where, to say that, people working intimately with communities, working on stakeholder engagement, they are in the perfect position to be gender advocates. You don't necessarily have to have a degree in gender to do the right thing. But it's also not something you can just do because you're a woman or just, pick up. Not just anyone can do it. There is some training involved. And so to your point about this, document that was recently produced, this is perfect. This is exactly what we need to be able to, something that's tangible, practical, that we can hand to conservation practitioners in the field who don't necessarily have a quote unquote gender background, but are in the perfect position to be those advocates.
Yeah, just a quick one. What hasn't worked? Two things, in my view. One is the failure of many people to understand the meaning of the word gender. It is so often misunderstood. As soon as you utter the word gender, suddenly it's one sex. Really, when I was growing up, the meaning of the word gender was, what is your sex? Male, female, or neutral? And I think this misunderstanding is fundamental to the reason why we're failing to address the issue of gender. I can't go any deeper. That's for another time. My second point, it relates more to at least in the African context where I'm most familiar, the ability, capacity, the freedom of women to participate actively in pursuing environmental careers. In large part, this is due to the fact that most people become environmentalists at a very young age. And in our context, it's also the time when the young lady is looking to get married, start a family, and there's huge pressure from all angles to start a family. And being an environmentalist, one of the things that tends to suffer is that very thing. So there is this contradiction, and everything that has happened so far to try to attract more women into becoming very active environmentalists in the African context, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, have so far not been successful.
Yes, Caroline. Then we had one more question.
Let me just add that what has not worked for us is the area of chemicals and waste management, because the sustainable consumption and production pattern from the wetland where we are from, we are supposed to be fishing and bringing our fresh fishes to eat. But these plastics are dumped into the river. These are the things that the fishes are even eating now. And then we come back and consume these fishes, and it's causing a whole lot of health risk. So the issue of management, the waste management, the illegal dumping and all sorts has not worked for us. And that area does not consider gender. As a woman, you are not supposed to be managing waste. So there is a lot of work to be done in that area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We have a lot of questions now from. So do you want to? Okay, gentlemen.
Thank you. I just want to thank the panel and also thank the wisdom of GEF to bring these people, very good people, to talk to us. Because, the messages are very strong. We have this global policy of GEF. But the messages that we're hearing provides us a reality check on how you apply and approach this gender policy at the country level. We talked about the issue of perception and how we can get this policy crucified by definition in terms of the perception on what gender is about. We need to be very sensitive at the ground level in terms of how people see it. The requirement and indeed the prerequisite requirement for those who come to the region and to the countries to actually dialogue with those people as to how palatable the messages can be actually pursued at the country level. We need to look at the context. It's not about gender, but it's about getting everybody together to find a better way forward. And also the issues that were raised, that international mechanisms are also very useful to actually get some accountability at the country level to actually address issues that are already culturally quite challenging to actually handle at the country level, more particularly with this issue of gender. So, those levels are very useful. The toolbox in terms of the skills of these people driving this whole agenda at their own communities is probably the most powerful delivery mechanism that we can do. If they own this thing and they are living at the communities, whether it's big legal advices, how you actually translate that into implementation at the ground and project level, I think it's great. I really enjoy the discussions very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And hopefully, I really don't want us to miss a little bit your question. And actually, when we are wrapping up later, we're really talking about what is it that we can do differently? What can we, as the GEF, what can you do differently? What can our agencies do differently? What can our country partners do differently? And let's go, I think we have about half an hour or something later to talk about some of those things. So I'm not forgetting to answer the question. We'll just end up with that. There were some other questions, but please, when you raise your hand and talk, please tell us who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Taddasa Amarra. I'm working for Pesticide Action Nexus Association, Pan Ethiopia, from Ethiopia. And I am the co-chair of IPEN, International POPs Elimination Network, which is a member of 500 organizations in more than 100 countries. I thank all the presenters there and the panelists there. When the discussion is raised about gender and environment and some of the chemicals issues, its main core is a health issue. But most of the time, these issues are environmentalized, and from my perspective, especially from African perspective, the discussion on environment is really very vague and very far. And the health issue is mostly forgotten because most of the time the the officials, the policymakers engaged are from environment ministries or environmentalists, and the health sector is a bit detached. So what I would like to ask is if there is any different experience, are these issues discussed also with the health ministries and the health sector, and is the health sector also involved in discussing gender and environment issues directly linked with the health issue so that it can be personalized and perceived very well and integrated in the health sector priorities of each country? Thank you.
Thank you. So just to see if I got the question, if I got it right, is you are asking whether there are any other engagement with other ministries. So it's not just the Ministry of Environment, also the Ministry of Health or Development. Is that what your question was? Or maybe you understood it and I didn't. So yeah, please clarify one more time if I got
this
it wrong.
Gender environment mostly is concluded as that the health of the women are impacted. And policies are also formulated, but is the health ministry also buying this issue and getting also some solutions towards, because the environment is on environmental issue, but the health issue, for example, the cancer issue, which is raised in Niger.
I think we have a couple of organizations here that deals with pollution and POPs. I think Caroline and Tracy. So maybe one of you can answer that question.
Thank you. Before the SDGs came on board, the MDGs were addressing these issues, and they are interrelated. So when it comes to issues of environment, I think they had a goal also addressed it. And when we were working on the MDGs, we used to bring together all the stakeholders that are involved. And it's the same thing that is going on with the SDGs now. Thank God the SDGs now have their targets that are even well spelled out, that people can just see and say, okay, this one is related to the health ministries and this one is related to these ministries. So when working on the SDGs now, we must bring all actors on board to the table while addressing these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. We had one more question. Thank you.
My name is Peter Lungu from Medim, Zambia. Before the session started, you showed us a clip of a video empowering women in agriculture. As one of the panelists there talked about medicinal plants, and someone else talked about conservation issues. All those issues involve land. Mm-hmm. And apart from advocacy, what practically is being done to ensure that women have rights to their land, or have a claim to the land, or own that land? Is there anything that's practically being done apart from advocacy?
Thank you. I think that's a very pertinent question. I'll get to you soon. I mean, in every country, there are different laws and customs when it comes to ownership and rights to land. So I'm certain they all have different perspectives. But is it anyone that would want to talk about something that they have seen, addressed, done in terms of improving women's rights to land, which is, of course, the foundation for many people? Does anyone want to say something? Yes. Ana Francisca.
Los audífonos.
Headsets. Well, regarding land ownership rights and from the standpoint of Indigenous women, in 2011, I did some research having to do with access and control of Indigenous women in my town to land in a community forest. As you said very rightly, every country has its own laws. But what I can report is that in the Indigenous communities, the way we're organized in a community forest, there is involvement of women, and women are entitled to own land. And this is seen as part of complementarity and duality, but viewed from the standpoint of indigenous communities, whereas Western laws do not provide for that. And that's why you have to understand the legal systems of indigenous peoples where that participation is provided for. Of course, we're still lacking, but there is an access of women to ownership in this community forest. But at least in my community in Guatemala, there are no Western laws that provide for this.
Answer there. It does tell us how important it is that in every context you either have a project or investment or you are starting an initiative, is to understand what those either customary or the legal frameworks are, and that you don't just run into doing things without understanding what they are, and also recognize that they are very different. There are no real generalizations on this issue, but it's again a critical one. So I am wondering, we will have more time for questions, but I actually had a lot of more questions myself, but I think if I could do, you have one more, then I had you too, sorry. So, no, you first. So, I forgot.
Thank you, Gabriela. I'm Kamla from Nepal. I just want to add on the Anna's presentation that indigenous women's, that we are fighting for the space among the general, fighting within the women for the space within, with having the distinct identity, fighting within the indigenous peoples with the space of indigenous women. You know, our contribution has not been recognized, it's not counted. So I would like to ask a question that GEF gender policy address our identity, that our contributions, so that easy to implement in the ground level. Thank you.
Just quickly to answer that, even though this is not a Q&A towards the Secretariat, but just to be very clear, it is that the gender policy that we have right now is fairly vague when it comes to indigenous peoples. In fact, what is happening is that a lot of the issues dealing with indigenous peoples are more referred to in our safeguard policy than it is in the gender policy. I think, again, it was something that we thought about in terms of the guidance that you can try to get those in. But I agree that sometimes there is a little bit this, what do you call it, boxing in of different issues, and those are not good for anyone. But it is, you know, you have indigenous peoples there, you have women there, and then you have something else over there. And in fact, in terms of really coming to the issues, you have to pull them together. And you don't do a gender analysis without doing a socioeconomic analysis or legal analysis of all the people there. So, I mean, I understand that this is an issue, and the GEF, we have discussed it, but right now it is mainly addressed, and I'm sure you discussed the safeguard policy yesterday in your deliberations, so keep your points to that then. I had another question from a gentleman down there.
Thank you very much. Je vais parler en français.
I'm going to. I've come from Niger. I'm a member of the GEF Council. I represent 9 countries of the Sahel plus Chad. This morning, I followed the exchange we had when it came to the role of the civil society when it comes to the gender issue and its implementation in our country. This has been interesting. Again, we've heard testimony from the ground, and I have 2 concerns. In all I heard, I did not feel among all the panelists of someone who talked as speaking about from the central government's point of view or the local government's point of view. Because if there is no partnership when it comes to the development strategy and development and policies when it comes to the local or national governments, then it's a problem. You are working with the SGP, and very little is done by the SGP compared to what is expected by civil society. So if you want help from the government, then your action has to be in keeping with what the government is doing. So it's good to have a partnership, but don't always be on the defenses as though you wanted to claim rights, etc. No, there isn't justice, but at the same time, you have to deal with these issues differently. You have to show that beyond solving problems which you are concerned with, there are other concerns. And through the IPAC, the idea is to try to get a maximum of people involved, people who are concerned. And we must show that today women or the youth or even handicapped people can help bring solutions to the climate change issue. And so I think that it's important to change perspective. You have to not remain on the defensive. You have to show that you can contribute to fighting climate change in your country. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that I can see the panel are so eager to answer this or to have a reaction. And please.
Yeah, I agree with you, sir. It's a very good remark that you have made. Well, for Mauritius, I can say I can speak for my country. All the CSOs, all the projects that we work for the GEF SGP, we work in collaboration with all the government and all the ministries concerned, be it Ministry of Women, Ministry of Social Inclusion, Ministry of Environment, or Ministry of Health. We work together in collaboration with all the ministries. And also us as CSOs, for example, for my project that I have been presenting here concerning the environmental issues, we work together with the disabled. We have 2 schools where children with disability are cultivating, growing medicinal plants with the help of others, and we are including all people in our projects, be it women, youth, and also disabled people. So for Mauritius, all the projects address these issues, and when I, as a board member of the National Steering Committee of the GEF SGP in Mauritius, when we analyze a project, we will see that it meets the criteria to address social issues, environmental issues, women, and others.
Yes, Edna.
Yeah, the council member from Niger, I think you make a very timely intervention. The issue of partnership with the government is fundamental to achieving any measure of success in whatever we do. But also to remember that it's a given that CSOs, by virtue of their own existence, without even saying it, they have been endorsed by the government, because you cannot operate in any country without the government saying so. And you have to go through a very, at least in some cases, a very well-defined process where you also demonstrate that you are actually working in partnership with governmental agencies. You have to get letters of attestation from various ministries with which you collaborate, showing how you collaborate. So I think that without even mentioning it, it should be understood that CSOs operating in the various contexts are doing so in partnership with government. But your point about emphasizing that we are more partners rather than we're kind of us against them, with her defending our own turf. It's quite easy to have that perception because of the inequity in the allocation of resources. It's my experience that civil society organizations are often the result of individuals who feel passionately about issues. They don't have any money, but they want to give their best, and they try to take on these issues, and then realize that the entities that have the resources to spend don't do so. They spend the money on other things, and there is a feeling of anger and frustration in the society that so many things would have gone right if only the money went where it should, but it often doesn't. And so that's one thing to remember. My last point is more of an appeal that I think the governments increasingly should be more proactive in encouraging partnership with CSOs. Because it's, for now, at least in my experience, it's mostly a one-way street. We have to do everything to be friends, to be subservient, to be respectful, to partner with government agencies. But very often government agencies do things they don't really need. They don't feel they need the input of civil society. They don't want sometimes the input of civil society. But there are some agencies that go out of their way to encourage. And I think encouragement of civil society organizations by the various governments will go a long way to empowering and encouraging and then inspiring these CSOs to do even better than they're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Edna.
I think civil society, even and state actors, whether indigenous organization, we have two different roles. We can be partners. We can be those who hold government accountable, but we've had good examples, like in Kenya, like Indigenous Information Network, for instance, does a lot of partnership with local governments, really, to engage women, especially even in issues of women land rights, and also in local development planning. So we have a number of examples, and we know that governments have resources that are beyond what we could match. So we tap on those resources and sometimes advise them on how they can really implement. And one example is in some area in Kenya where even we partner with local leadership, because they also have a constituency development fund. So we do partner with government, but we also at some point hold them accountable to show them what is not working and how we need to proceed forward. So I think relationship between CSOs and government, it's evolving and it's getting to a better place in some areas. In some areas, some challenges, but I think dialogue is what is needed at the local level and national.
Thank you so much, Edna. I think that you summarized a lot of the points in this conversation. I wanted to, unless there was any, and again, you will have a chance to ask questions one more time, but I wanted, we still had some questions. We had sort of agreed as a group that we would spend a little bit of time to identify or share with each other some of the things that we think works really well, and really what are some of the recommendations moving forward. And I think we already, some of the questions alluded to that already. So I wanted first give the floor to one man that hasn't come up yet, and is Muqdad Amen. You are from Iraq, and you have worked in the university there for many years on environmental research. And I know that you wanted to share something that you think that really needs to be done in Iraq in terms of sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'll prefer to go back to your first slide when you had a very encouraging essay or banner saying investing in women is good for the environment. The question is, what kind of investment are we talking about? The ladies here might be all, I'm sure, they all have certain positions and have certain, they have certain kind of speciality, whether in knowledge and science and society. So would they prefer, and we're talking about this matter, would they prefer to be as the woman which was shown on the video being a tool or a planner. And again, when we talk about equality, gender equality, is that satisfactory for every woman? I mean, when we talk about, we have to talk about the improvement of the woman rather than the equality. There are so many, you know, we are in two different worlds. Surely, we're two different worlds. We're talking, when we talk about equality, we should talk about the northern world, but in the southern world, where most of the community might be poor, for example, there should be investment in the women to take her from the 80% level to the other 20%, which is better. So we have to talk, in our communities, we have to talk about improvement rather than gender equality. They are already have the equality. They are sharing the goods and bads with the men. And it's not fair for her. Now, talking about this investment in Iraq, especially in Iraq, we have a tremendous gap in education. And when I talk education, I don't mean only teaching rather than the big word of education. As you know, development, the traditional development, is no longer useful for any country. And mixing traditional and conventional development with sustainable development is by itself a big wrong. It's a big false step that people might think of. Sustainable development is something absolutely different from the conventional development. This might be to the northern world strange, but for us it is, and I can prove it for you. Me, myself, and other colleagues that I know of, in Iraq specifically, have gone through several stages of research work on academics, university academics, students, undergraduates, government officials. We found that more than 90% of those categories sometimes have not even heard of an expression sustainable development. They know nothing about the concept, they know nothing about the practices, they know nothing about the principle, and go on. So, if we're talking about investment, the best investment for the literate women in Iraq would be to educate her in such a kind of knowledge and experience that then she would be able to fill that intellectual gap in the society, which means every country should establish different opportunities for the women that would enable her, empower her intellectual capacity to fill that gap. And that's something in relation to many other countries may be different, but this is the case in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muqdad. Maybe I just, instead of me reacting to that, I was thinking if there was anyone else in here that, because, I mean, you are placing an important distinction here in terms of development, but in the same time, you are also saying that capacity development or building is very important, and that is something that I've heard many of you talking about as well. And maybe I don't even myself like the word capacity building because it means that someone is giving something else, but it's the access to information and to have the equal opportunity to information and understanding what their rights are or what engaging in a conversation that could be something new. So I just, may I just see if there's anyone else in the panel that want to respond to that, or no? Yes. Yes. You may.
Thank you. Me, myself,
yes,
did all my best to improve my capacity building. Mm-hmm. I started almost 10 years ago, gaining the knowledge about sustainable development. I didn't get it through the radio. I had to participate almost in 17 training courses, all international, either with European or Canadian or Australian or American universities. And I was really concentrating on the Sustainable Development Goal Academy, which is related to the Sustainable Development Solution Network, which have built up my capacity. It's not something, everyone has to build up his capacity, especially for the women, that she can, this is the only way to improve her situation in the community.
So thank you for the clarification. So I think that we have a clear recommendation here that women need to build their own capacity to engage in sustainable development. Is that the summary of that? So I'm going to move. I'm holding you there because I think we have to do, I would like everyone to be able to say something like a parting words on something that you think needs to be done. Both could be at the local level, be something that you're working towards that you think that you should, I don't dare to use the word investing anymore, but focusing on and moving forward. I did have before, I think, Vivian, you also did not really have the chance. I know that you wanted to talk about some recommendations, and I think you've already thought about it, so I want to give you the word, and then while she's speaking, if the rest of you can think about something that you want to say or add to this conversation before we open it up again. Thank you, Vivian.
Yeah. I think one important contribution that Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, had for the successful implementation of GEF project is their traditional knowledge. And today is a huge challenge how we will include traditional knowledge in the implementation of this project. If we were in a community in the north of Argentina, here, we will have full forest in this area. And if someone, for example, many times scientists came to community and say, how you have all these forests, how you have all this biodiversity, all this animal, this plant, who has done it? Where is the scientist? We say not. It is done and it's passed throughout our generation. We learn from elders. And we are teaching our kids how to maintain biodiversity and develop biodiversity, not only for Indigenous people, for all the world. But at the same time, the scientist says, oh, why you don't teach me everything that you know? How to do it and improve and have the forest in other place. That is fine and this is great. And many times Indigenous people have shared this knowledge free. But after we saw the papers with the name of the scientists, even we don't have any recognition of Indigenous peoples, or even the Indigenous woman who has deeply knowledge about the environment management. And for this, the big challenges is not to look Indigenous people as poor. This is happening in my country. Many times Indigenous people are poor because they don't get the PhD or they don't get like a high education. They cannot stay or they cannot sit in the same table discussing biodiversity policies. That is not true. And unfortunately, the international community since 1992 with the Convention on Biodiversity has recognized this role and importance of traditional knowledge. And recently, last week, the UN Conference on Climate Change also has taken decisions regarding this. Now, what we need to do is to implement this decision at national level, at local level. And for this, I think what we can do is to consider you as member of councils and leaders and leaders of NGOs and that are working in environment, we need to work together. Indigenous people, particularly women, we are losing all our knowledge because discrimination, because the school, because there is not policy in the countries. And when we say, for example, there will be like an implementation of protected area, we have our ideas or views, they are not taken into account. For this, what we can do is like work together and have Indigenous people, particularly women, as partners. And we will have a better result. For this, I saw many projects of GEF projects that they have included traditional knowledge, for example, for the implementation of Nagoya protocols, traditional knowledge associated with genetic resource, but indigenous people are not on the table. Indigenous women are not in the table. For this, if we work together, the countries, you will have the implementation of this decision in more realistic way, not only the paper, but also we can share all this knowledge with the world to have a better environment, not only for us, for everyone. For this is I would like to encourage you to work together and have these conversations and really not to discriminate indigenous women and their knowledge, and also respect for the right of indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to see if you, in the context of youth and your work on youth organization, if you have something very quick. Let's do this brief, very quick. One recommendation, just one of the key things.
Well, in terms of recommendation for youth inclusion, I recommend that we need to make a conscious effort to create space for youth inclusion. To give one key example, we all know that the UNFCCC has made a conscious effort to have a youth constituency, which we call Yongo, who participate actively and also share their concerns. So perhaps GEF could also consider that, so at least the youth can also present their paper through virtual means as a way of contributing to the process. So that creates an opportunity for active youth inclusion in the decision-making process. So that's at least one key recommendation we can make from a youth perspective. And maybe if we could just add the last one, just to also find a way to incentivize young people. It doesn't have to be expensive. Sometimes just some small national recognition or even a certificate from the president to show appreciation. That can also motivate young people to contribute to the environmental action. So those are some of the few recommendations we want to give in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were two very clear, good recommendations. Tracy? Okay. You have any? One?
Yes, creating the he for she agenda is still a very serious agenda that we need to take up, where men understand the role that women play in policy making and in development, in sustainable development, and all that is very critical. Funding also needs to trickle down in such a way that it addresses key issues, gender issues, and those kinds of issues. I also wanted to talk about knowledge. I don't know if I mentioned that. The knowledge is still very critical in the process, and so those are the key areas I want to talk about. That, yeah.
All right. So, sorry. In the context of knowledge, I mean, we talked about indigenous people's knowledge. What is the kind of knowledge you're referring to?
Knowledge at policy level and also at the community level, especially where the community people themselves understand that the different roles of men and women play in the community is also very critical, because sometimes women are just relegated.
Thank you, Tracy. Tommy? Yeah, up to you.
Two quick ones for me, and these stem from how I feel every time I'm in a room and having a meeting. We're talking about environment issues, and I look around and I see it's mostly men. And when you count how many women, there's probably 2 or 3, and invariably, at least in my own context, 1 or 2 of them are white. And not that one detests this or condemns this in any way, it's just that there is a real dire shortage of African women involved at high level to engage with environment issues for the various reasons that I mentioned earlier in responding to that question, what hasn't worked. And so my recommendations would be 1 to the governments and 2 to the donors. To figure out ways in which we can really encourage and inspire young women to embrace environment issues, recognizing that the women have a decisive role to play in the world that is evolving, considering, for example, that Africa is going to be one of the continents that pays the highest price for the ills of the past. And yet its people are not really very much involved, all of them, in finding lasting solutions. I think women have a critical role to play. So the extent to which donors and the countries can support thought processes that look at ways of engaging women at higher level to participate proactively and in a consistent way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Maybe, Kim, do you have some last points as well?
Sure. Excuse me. You know, again, I guess from the conservation perspective, you know, I first want to say just how important it's been for us as a GEF agency to have the policies and you know, the metrics and the action plan and all these supporting tools that come along with the GEF in really driving us forward to look at gender more critically. So, you know, I like to think that you know, there's the moral case for having a gender lens. It's a human right to be part of decision making about the lands and the resources that impact you. But it's also a business case or a conservation case. Like I was saying before, it's more effective, it's more efficient, it's more sustainable. But it really, at the end of the day, it really is the donors that drive a lot of the work that we do. And you know, I think to the extent that the GEF and other climate and environmental donors can really drive home that point of how important it is, and that they are, you know, sort of not a watchdog, but you know, that you're actually following up on it, really does impact how we do our work, and in turn impacts how we do work outside of our GEF projects, as sort of a spillover effect. So just the recommendation to, you know, be as precise and supportive as you can as a donor.
We'll try, and the other one sitting there, I'm sure, agrees. Ana Francisca, you had a last point, yes?
Una recomendación.
One recommendation. One recommendation that I would have to share with you would be the members of the GEF, that you continue to place your bets on the gender issue, but at a local level. This morning I heard someone talk about, and this I heard from civil society organizations, that they're expecting projects at a local level, that they no longer want to be middlemen, but that this comes directly to them. And I think of women. We are partners, we are allies, not objects, but subjects entitled to rights. And so this is the only way where we can bring about a change and transformation in environmental sustainability. And I say this from the local grassroots, because here we come from local grassroots. All of us, we come from the grassroots, and we've been educated there thanks to our grandparents. I will always mention that, because it is the wealth of knowledge that has been shared with us from one generation to the other. So the recommendation is that we continue protecting at a local level, in strengthening and in building capacities of women in general, Indigenous women, because of our own cosmovision that we have with the food security. It is an essential element. Many people die of hunger, children, young people, and women, Indigenous women, are those that have the safeguard, the possibility of saving a lot of lives with this. And that is why the Network of Indigenous Women and Biodiversity of Guatemala, and within Latin America and the Caribbean, we are making that huge effort. And I believe that this is a very important space. The two of us, Bibi and yours truly, that is what makes us really important to participate as Latin Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a very good ending to this conversation. I think that really continue working at the local level, that's where the changes are going to happen, and continue that. So unless we have any other one that wants to say a last word, I thought that this was such a good ending.
Yes.
Okay, but very fast, because I know Anar wants to wrap up and make a quick conclusion, which is going to be very hard. So please, very quickly.
Yes, I think I should say it because I want to see a situation whereby we translate science into traditional knowledge. Because 1.5 degrees to us is science. Now, how do we build renewables among ourselves in the communities? How does it work that we will not sit down and then they bring the clean cook stove to us? Instead, let's teach us how to make this clean cook stoves by ourselves. So let's begin to look at it from that way. That's what I mean by translating science into traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have only a proposition, a recommendation to make to the GEF, is that maybe in the future for the OP7, for the project, when we have the project proposals, maybe we can ask the CSO that is sending the proposals, ask them about the gender balance that they have in the project, and also if they can include, because if they will have to put gender women in it and they are not, they have not yet got the experience, maybe we can put aside something as capacity building of the women so that we are sure they are putting women together with men in the projects.
Well, I have some good news for you. I think we are, unless you are thinking about gender balance in terms of the project, but if you're thinking in terms of how the benefits are distributed between men and women, in fact, with our new indicators for GEF7, we actually are asking agencies to report specifically on this disaggregated by women and men. So from now on, with the new projects coming in for approval, we will track and the share of men and women benefiting from
and also on the board, because all project we have a project implementation committee.
Yes,
so there should be women and men together on the board for the projects.
On the board for the project. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's put that down as a recommendation. I am now going to hand over to our chair, who will take the lead. But before I do, I honestly, before I end, I have to thank you all, and it's been really fascinating for me to listen to you. I think I could have continued for much longer, but with each of you. And I think, but it was also so fantastic, I think, to have so many different perspectives and to hear from all of you. And I think even though that it was a daunting task to think we had 10 panelists, but in my view, I think it worked out, and I hope that the rest of you think that too. I'm going to now hand over to give her the easy job of summarizing this conversation. So thank you. But maybe you want to ask for if they want more questions.
You can stay, actually. So thanks very much, Gabriela. This has indeed been a very, very rich discussion. Before I turn to make some concluding remarks, Gabriela had suggested that we would open the floor again if there were any last questions that you had from the audience. So if there are any, now's your chance. We can take two more questions before we have to wrap up. Any last questions from the audience? No. Okay. So we can then move on to the concluding remarks. And of course, it is a very difficult task to have to try and summarize what was a very rich discussion with very many different perspectives that were offered. We heard from the indigenous people's perspective, from women more broadly, from youth. And I think that one of the things that was very important for me was the fact that gender equality intersects with so many other issues like conflict, like health, like land rights. We also, and the fact that we can't deal with these issues in silos, and that we need to be able to come and look at them from a broader perspective so that we can ensure that we're making progress on a more fundamental level. We also heard about the importance of traditional knowledge and how we can ensure that we can take those perspectives on board as well. I think one of the things that I found very interesting was the fact that the policy, the GEF policy, tried to move from doing no harm to doing good. And I think that this is a really important element because it looks to the issue of not seeing women just as victims or recipients, but actually as agents of change in their own development. And I think that that is something that we have to focus on, because women do have the power we have to give women the power to have decision-making power and to actually be able to translate and make those cook stoves themselves. So I mean, I think that point is very important. I also think that it was raised many times, but this is not something that's just nice to do, but fundamental to our efforts to combat climate change and have effective environmental governance. For Canada, we want to make sure that the organizations that we work with, including the GEF, distribute their funding in a way that closes the gaps in equitable access to natural resources, productive inputs, and key resources. And we also want to ensure that we are creating platforms for women and girls to have access to leadership and decision-making processes. But having said all of that, one thing that I also wanted to underline is that this can't be done without the active participation of men. Gender equality is not only about women, but it is about men, and it's the relationship between them, and so between all of us, rather. And the final point that I wanted to make, one of the people asking questions had mentioned that civil society is the most powerful delivery mechanism, and we also heard again from one of the other panelists that it's at the local level that we really need to be paying attention. And I think that those are very important points for us to be able to take forward in our deliberations as GEF Council members. So that is my attempt to wrap things up. I think we're going to be moving into the launch of a document here. So I'm just going to be introducing Steve Gold, who is the head of climate change for UNDP, and he also provides oversight for the GEF Small Grants Program. And we also have Françoise Clotte, who is the Director of Policy and Operations in the GEF Secretariat. So they are going to be launching a document that focuses on gender and the environment. So Françoise and Steve, if you could please come up.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to all of you. It really has to start with a word of thanks, because it's been extremely refreshing to, I'm sure, many of us, to hear the voices of your work on implementation, engagement, advocacy, and results indeed, right? It's the best introduction we could possibly have to what we are here to gather around at this point. The face-to-face conversation and what we have heard about your own experience of what works, what doesn't work, what recommendations you have after so much experience for us to register greater impact is really critical. And as much as the face-to-face is valued and indeed enjoyable, we also have to capture this for greater impact via knowledge sharing and via learning of other constituencies that are not with us today. And that's very much what, through the publication that we are here to introduce today, we're trying to do at the crossroad of the work that the GEF and the small grant programs of UNDP are doing. We are trying to collect the voices, the examples, and the case experience of the experience of involvement of women that create global environmental benefit. And indeed, we're not here to advocate. We're here just to share the fact that it doesn't take advocacy, actually, to just collect the evidence of the impact that involving women into environment generates in terms of global environmental benefit. So we've been working with the SGP for 25 years now, and the SGP is, of course, a very important vehicle of the GEF's and the donors' intent to reach CSOs and communities, and the engagement of all the strength of the community in all of their diversity into the generation of results. We've worked on this consistently and with great results, and that publication that we're introducing today gathers these voices and these experience. At the same time, let me add, and you probably have heard it because it's been brewing for a year and a half, and a lot of consultations have happened, a lot of work has happened across agencies and across countries. You probably know that the GEF itself has adopted a new policy addressing gender equality, whose ambition is to move us from the previous setup where we had the preoccupation of doing no harm to a new setup where we have a deliberate preoccupation of making some good happen. And that new policy, which is in the process now of being implemented, which is binding as we speak into the new work program of the GEF, is also something we want to celebrate because I think it gives us a chance as a partnership in general and in our collaboration within the small grant program to go even further. So we'll be doing a big push on this. Part of that big push is to share the knowledge, is to share the learning, to make sure that our voices reach larger number of people. People can be reached through the web, they can be reached through publication, they can be reached through the storytelling and the face-to-face. And so this publication is another attempt to make sure that we have that reach with that kind of resonance. So my encouragement here is, now that we have it, please read it, share it, spread it around. It will be on the website of the Small Grant Program. It is easily accessible. And while I'm here, I cannot resist adding another element to this, which is that you might be aware, and if you're not, that's the good chance for me to make you aware of it. We also have an online training course on gender, which we have developed as well with the Small Grant Program, but also with the GEF agencies in general and with the Secretary of the MEAs. This is an online program which is meant for everyone. It is not copyright. It is not paying. I mean, it's free. It is meant to be shared. It is meant to be available. Please use it, market it, share it, and make sure that your organization, to the extent feasible, use it as a mainstream training program, because that's really what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is mainstream and should be mainstream. So thanks very much for being here, and I'll leave to Steve the chance to introduce more specifically the publication. Thank you.
Françoise, thank you very much for that. And I have to say that I also was incredibly inspired by that last discussion. I shared your enthusiasm and interest in hearing the stories. I was touched by the stories very much. And the publication that we're here to launch today touches upon some of those stories. In fact, one of the stories is actually included in the publication. Our colleague from Mauritius, who talked about the medicinal plants and the tea production, is one such story that's included in this publication. I'm honored, actually, to be able to launch this publication together with you, Françoise, from the GEF Secretariat today. It's a very exciting and interesting publication. I'm here representing UNDP. Adriana Dinu, who was going to be making these remarks, unfortunately was unable to make it here in time. She had a commitment to New York and will only be arriving later this evening. UNDP very much embraces a gender-responsive approach through its gender equity strategy. And in fact, if you look across our portfolio of GEF-funded projects, 86% of the projects in the portfolio focus on mainstreaming gender and advancing gender equality. Likewise, if you look at the SGP portfolio itself, it's been proactively promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, and I believe 30% of all of the small grants projects are actually led by women themselves. And so this publication is really an opportunity, women as environmental stewards, an opportunity to showcase many of these examples. I had mentioned the story from Mauritius that our colleague spoke about previously. There are many other interesting examples in the book, in the publication. I recommend that you review them. For example, one of them that caught my attention was the experience from Peru. In fact, indigenous women from Peru who were instrumental in the recovery of native species of cotton that were on the brink of extinction by looking for seeds, for example, indigenous seeds in pillowcases, looking along old fences. They found these seeds, and they effectively, successfully lobbied the government, who wanted to reverse a policy that forbid the cultivation of these indigenous seeds in favor of these commercial cotton seeds. And these are the kinds of stories that are captured in this publication. I would strongly encourage you to read these stories. Francoise, you mentioned sharing them with your networks. I think many in this room will also be taking some time off over the next week or two, spending time with your families and with your friends, and I would encourage you to share these stories with your families and friends and with the young people in your life, so your sons and your daughters or your nieces and your nephews. I plan to do that. Not only the stories included in the publication, but some of the stories that I heard from you earlier today that really touched me. And hopefully we'll have the chance over the holidays to reflect on some of these stories together and share them with our friends and our loved ones, and especially the young people in our lives. Thank you. Shall we? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Francoise and Steve. We look forward to reviewing the document that you've just launched. I wanted to also take this opportunity to thank all the panelists. I don't think we had the chance to give them a round of applause, so if we could do that right now, that would be great. I think that was the first time that I've ever seen a panel with so many participants, but as Gabriela mentioned, it was very, very interesting to have so many different perspectives and to hear all of your different stories. So I think that right now this is the end to this particular session, and we'll be moving on to the summary and closing of today's event. And so I would ask Victor to join us at the front so that he can do the summary. Victor?
Good afternoon. Looks everyone is so quiet and ready to move to the next step after such a wonderful discussion here. Victor, who is in another discussion, and so he had requested that we could summarize while we were there. I was keenly taking notes of the discussions that were taking place this afternoon, especially the gender discussion, which was really very interesting, and should thank Canada for, for chairing and for being able to really bring us to that great discussion. It was quite interesting discussion. It brought quite some issues which are very important for us who are working in the field, and sharing these stories, as already been indicated, are stories that are live down in the community level, at the national level, and the challenges that different CSOs, indigenous peoples, and other local communities and rural women also face while they are out there, trying to do the environmental activities. And it was quite interesting, and some of the questions that were brought up were also very, interesting and challenging at the same time. And at one point I was thinking, like, maybe there is also an issue to think very clearly, as what Sierra Leone, our colleague from Sierra Leone, brought up and said, in some of those decision-making discussions, you only find that most of the time are men. It's not only in Africa, but in different places. And it's very important to ask yourself, why are women, where are they, and why are they not making those decisions? And it's the same question we ask ourselves as indigenous women. We say, where are we? Why are we not in those particular areas where they are making those decisions? So it's very important that we look at that. We enhance our capacity, even though Gabriela was saying the question of capacity building is always something challenging for many people, wondering what capacity are you talking about and what exactly do you mean by capacity building. And the gentleman from Iraq actually brought a very, very important aspect of learning. It reminded me of some years back I went to Mount Abu in India, and one of the concepts that we were learning was that it's a long life learning. You have to keep on learning. You have to keep on building your own capacity, trying to understand some of the issues. You have the knowledge, but you cannot just keep what you have. You have to continue, building it and making sure that you get to remember, not only to remember, but also to really empower many other people with that knowledge you have. And for indigenous women, for indigenous communities, that knowledge that they get that we have gotten from many years is a knowledge we keep on carrying, reminding ourselves. And when you go to the community, whatever you have forgotten, you keep on reminding yourself and build on to it. Collecting seeds is very easy to forget because the seeds also disappear because of environmental degradation. I think when the executive director was talking about the convention, we had the 14th Convention on Biological Diversity, and talking about how much we really have to do in order to save our environment, to be able to save our biodiversity, and the issues that were happening in the climate change, bringing back the traditional knowledge. Why do we need that? We need that so that we can be able to really bring some of those aspects that have been lost for years. And there was also one other very important thing that was brought up, the question of laws. And you find that most of the women, the rural women who are there, the indigenous women, understanding the laws that are put in place is something that is very crucial, that we have to really make sure that we try to translate it and have the people understand. And the recommendations that were brought were very crucial. We should not forget them. And one of the key issues also is about recognition of the role of women in environmental management. And of course, there is no political will, so we have to know maybe our council members, when they discuss with the other members who are going to come as from tomorrow, this is very important to emphasize on issues of political will. And I think issue of partnership came into be, which is something that was discussed, brought by the person from Niger. And it was discussed clearly, and we really have that partnership on the ground, but it could not be it's not something that we can say is easily recognized by government. Because when they look at the CSOs, they always look at them in different ways. And that's the discussion which was also here. But for us all, we know that governments are key partners in our work, and we are always, it's always important to be with them. And I think just to end, there was the issue that came towards the end on women and land issues. That's a critical issue, not only for Africa, but also for Asia continent. And we know our colleagues, our indigenous women our rural women from Asia and Latin America, these are issues of land are very important. And I think this is something that in future we really want to look at, no matter what kind of discussion that you'll be discussing on issues of wildlife trade, issues of plastic, issue of all environmental issues, we still have to touch on land. And it's very interesting that this is trickling down to the rural woman, to the indigenous woman on the ground. They want to hold that paper. They want to make sure they know whose property is this and whose land is this. And we acknowledge that, and we think it's an important thing to be able to look at. I think the last part of this meeting, so that we can be able to finalize quickly, the launch of the book is really a wonderful thing again towards the end here, very interesting and very important for us to have this booklet and to have the stories that were told. It was just like carrying forward what was being discussed, documenting what we have just heard from the panelists here. And is a booklet that we all treasure. We always treasure documentation. I know in most of the places these days is paperless. But when we go, we want to look at those pictures. We want to look at that information that we have. And so we really appreciate the fact that this booklet had been, launched at this point. So I think in summary, this was a great day. It was a lot of work done. We started a bit early on a negative side, but at the same time, we were positively, got back to the building without any single problem, if you can still remember the morning. But at least we came back in a very positive way, and we have carried that positiveness up towards this end of the day. So I think I can summarize it at that. And thank everyone who was able to attend with us today and who has been able to really contribute. We are still going on. It's the beginning of the week. And I do wish everyone a very good evening and enjoy your reception if it's still there. And I wish you all a very wonderful time. And thank you so much for participating on behalf of the CSOs and of Victor, who is away for another discussion right now. Thank you.
There's a pair of glasses here. Okay, I do think that's it for the day. I think that the reception is going to be open at 5. Is that correct, Oresta? Yes? Unless there's any other, is there any other businesses? No? Otherwise, please, and the reception is out where we had lunch. So please, everyone, go there and let's have a nice glass of wine. Or 2. No, I shouldn't say that. Thank you so much, and thank you again for all the great panelists and the good conversation. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yes. What? What? Hello again. Just to remind you all that tomorrow we'll start at 9, and there will be no fire drills at 9 o'clock. You're all going to get straight in here. We can almost promise it because it doesn't happen 2 days in a row. So tomorrow at 9, here. Thank you.